Hey guys, this is the MMA Breakdown, back with my predictions for UFC 196, McGregor versus Diaz. Starting off with my recap of the last event, UFC Fight Night 83, I believe, Cowboy versus Cowboy. Another bad event for me, 7 for 13, 8,653 overall for the event, and that dropped me to 4,568, which is below where I was at the start of the event. So, I'm continuing my descent in the ranks, but be assured I fully intend to make my way back up and finish within the top 500, just as I have each of the last 2 years. But, okay, so I'll scroll through my picks quickly here. Cerrone and a nice submission win. I did pretty well at the top of the card. Brunson, Garbrandt, Bermudez, Riggs. In hindsight, maybe one of the worst picks I've ever made. But I thought he would win. So I don't take back my pick at all. But got that one very wrong. And Oluwale Bombos had a great knockout over Sarafian. All right. Okay, so on to UFC 196, McGregor versus Diaz. Obviously, I'm really disappointed that Rafael dos Anjos got injured. I thought that was going to be a super competitive fight, a really hard one to pick. I was probably going to go with Dos Anjos, but I was back and forth on that, since that fight was announced. But McGregor versus Diaz, I don't know how competitive it will be. I mean, it definitely could, given that McGregor is fighting 2 weight classes above his normal weight class. I think that just that alone could allow for the fight to be competitive, but definitely a fight that still has a lot of intrigue and anticipation behind that. At least, I'm excited about it, even if it turns out that it's not a very competitive fight. But definitely going to give my thoughts on that more when we get to that. But as for the rest of the card, I don't know, with the McGregor-Diaz main event now, it kind of exposes the weakness of the undercard for me, at least. I mean, I'm certainly not going to complain. The main and co-main events are really great. I mean, those are the biggest names in the sport right now. At least, Holly Holm's the biggest name in the women's division. But the undercard is very weak. Those 3 fights, none of them should be on a pay-per-view typically. I have to point out that is weak. Not that I care so much, because the main and co-main are great. And then on the prelim card, there are actually some okay matchups on Fight Pass. And then Elkins versus Skelly, I like that. But other than that, nothing really too noteworthy. Okay, so starting off with the UFC Fight Pass prelim card at featherweight, Julian Erosa versus Teruto Ishihara. Not a great matchup. Both guys from Tough, or at least Ishihara was on the Japanese version of Tough. It wasn't actually called a Tough season. I think Road to UFC Japan, but he was the finalist and fought Mitsuto Hirota to a draw. And I actually thought, not only did I think he won that fight, but I thought he looked way better than he did on the show. I actually didn't think he even deserved to make it to the finale. I thought he lost to, I can't remember the guy's actual name, but his nickname was Wiki on that show. But looked really good against Hirota. Thought he was doing a good job of stuffing the takedown. Landed a lot more strikes. Was the more aggressive striker. And then Julian Erosa from the latest season of Tough, the McGregor versus Faber season, and he got knocked out by Artem Lobov in the house, and he won a fight before that too as well. And then won his fight at the finale against Marcin Roszek, and he's a guy who, for the first round and a half of the fight, couldn't look more underwhelming and couldn't look like he has less tools to work with. But in both of his fights that he won, the one in the house and then the one at the finale, they were pretty similar. As the fight went on, he started to land more strikes, and he's not a high-volume striker, pretty low output, but he has this really crazy footwork game that he tries to implement that doesn't seem to be too effective, but as the fight goes on, he just seems to have better cardio than his opponent. He can land a few more strikes. It's a really long striker. But for this matchup, I think I have to go with Ishihara. I think he fought the better guy in Hirota, better than either of Erosa's two opponents that he had wins over, and just got trashed by Labov, who I think it's been revealed since Tough that he's not going to cut it in the UFC, and Ishihara is just going to be more aggressive, whereas Erosa is super patient, really sits back and needs that time to figure out his opponent. So I'm going to go with Ishihara here. I'll just guess decision. All right, next up, the lightweight, Justin Salas versus Jason Saggo. Justin Salas just honestly shouldn't be in the UFC, and I'm actually surprised that he's still on the roster. I thought for some reason he got cut after his last loss to Joe Proctor, got knocked out, and wasn't a very competitive fight before the knockout from what I can remember. Maybe I just thought he got cut because he's been win-loss, alternating wins and losses since he got in the UFC, and his best performance is probably against Ben Wall, knocking him out in the first round, which means next to nothing really. I got knocked out by Joe Proctor, got destroyed on the ground by Thiago Tavares. Doesn't seem to really have a defined game, and hasn't fought in, I think it was a year and a half. A year and a half since he's last fought. So I'm going with Saggo here, who actually had a good performance in his debut against Josh Shockley, I think it was. Looked like a dominant grappler, was able to take his back, got back mount and pounded him out. That was nice. And then lost to Paul Felder in his next fight, and Paul Felder has gone on to do well, so not really a bad loss there. And that wasn't he wasn't really dominated in that fight. I mean, he definitely lost, but I thought he made it fairly competitive and caught him with a flying knee right at the end, dropped him, I think. So I think he looks like a solid fighter at the low end of the division. And again, Justin Salas just looks like he doesn't belong in the UFC. So I'm definitely going to go with Saggo here. I'm going to say submission, I think, since he looks good on the ground, and Salas looked really weak there against Tavares. All right, and then the Fight Pass main event, lightweight, Diego Sanchez versus Jim Miller. I really like this. For a while, I would have thought that Jim Miller is still too relevant of a fighter, too elite in the division to fight Sanchez, but I think it's clear after that loss to Chiesa and just kind of his inconsistency over the last couple of years that he's not really elite anymore. He's a gatekeeper at most, and I think this is going to be a really fun matchup. Maybe a few years ago, I'd definitely take Jim Miller. Just overall, the more skilled fighter. Diego Sanchez, his striking just seems to have completely gone away, or maybe just because he's not as athletic now as he once was, and all the damage he's taken. He just looks like a shell of himself and really doesn't have striking skills or technique to fall back on, and can't really take people down anymore. At least he hasn't been lately. But Jim Miller, he really wins fights with his grappling. A long time, really talented submission specialist in the UFC, but not a great takedown guy. and I don't really see how he's going to get it there against Sanchez. Sanchez, as bad as he's been, as easily as he's been dominated over his last few fights, he hasn't really been out-wrestled, even against guys like Ricardo Lamas. So I don't see Miller taking him down like he did to Danny Castillo. I don't really see him just jumping on a leg lock or going for something crazy like he usually does, or at least I don't see him making that work. And Sanchez at lightweight, I feel like he might have the size, he might have the better cardio late to get his body on Miller, force him to the ground, and start to wear on him. And Miller, when he's put on his back, when he's put in a bad position on the ground, that's where he really falls apart. Going back to the Pat Healy loss, and also just his last fight against Chiesa, where he got his back early, couldn't finish, then he got his back taken and got subbed. So I think Sanchez is going to pull this off. Miller, I just don't see him having he's not lethal enough with his striking to really shut down Sanchez on the feet, and I don't see him getting the takedown. So I think Sanchez might outlast him here, tire him out, outstrike him on the feet, and take him down later in the fight and possibly get a submission. So I'm gonna take Sanchez. All right, on to the Fox Sports 1 prelim card at featherweight. Darren Elkins versus Chaz Skelly. This is a really good fight. I think both guys are grapplers. Elkins, I'd give him the edge in the striking. Even both of them are very rudimentary there. But Skelly, his striking looks, I think, a lot more awkward, and guys are always on the verge of knocking him out. Even the Sean Soriano fight, even though he was able to get it to the ground almost the entire fight, anytime it was on the feet, it looked like Soriano was really putting pressure on him, making him very uncomfortable. And then in his last fight against Kevin Souza, got dropped early and was just on the ropes that entire fight before he pulled out a really great finish, was able to take his back in a really neat scramble. But I would have to say that Elkins has the better striking between the two of them. But if this is a grappling match, which Skelly pretty much has to make it if he's going to win, and he is great at taking the back. He's good at creating scrambles, and has a great rear naked choke. But if they start scrambling, I think Elkins, he's got the better positional grappling all day. He's the better bread and butter wrestler. I think he stays out of those bad positions on the ground. I think he can keep himself from getting his back taken. And I like his wrestling to nullify the submission game of Skelly. Elkins is a good scrambler himself. I think his wrestling wins out against Skelly's more submission-based grappling. So I'm going to take Elkins here. All right, next up at middleweight, Vitor Miranda versus Marcelo Guimaraes. This is a bad matchup, and this has to be one where they're just trying to get Miranda a win where he looks impressive, because Guimaraes is just awful. For those of you who didn't see this fight, and if you have Fight Pass, I want you guys to go in the archives and look up this fight. Guimaraes' debut against Dan Stitchin, and don't watch the fight, it was horrible. But fast forward to the very end of that fight, like the last minute of the third round, Guimaraes, I'll always remember this, a very vivid memory, one of the most distinct that I have in MMA. Guimaraes has this guy against the fence, has him in the clinch, and he starts throwing these body shots from the clinch with absolutely nothing behind them, and he's screaming with vigor as he throws these very petty body shots, and it was the most hilarious thing I've ever seen in the UFC. And he just keeps this up, this screaming with these very meaningless body shots for maybe about 30 seconds, if not longer. Please go watch that and let me know what you think of it. It's hilarious. But yeah, that's about the most meaningful thing Guimaraes has done. Got a decision win over Andy Enns and got knocked out by Hyun-Gyu Lim. So not really a talented fighter. Vitor Miranda from Tough Brazil 3, got out wrestled by what's his name? Zapato, Antonio Carlos Jr. But since then had 2 wins. Got a head kick knockout win over Jake Collier after being out wrestled early, and then his last fight against Clint Hester looked good. I think got taken down, but was able to reverse the position and had him in like a quarter mount, I think, against the fence, and pounded him out from there. That was really nice. So, he's a proven finisher, whereas Guimaraes is just basically a nobody in the UFC. So definitely going with Miranda here. There's no reason Guimaraes should win. All right, at welterweight, Eric Silva versus Nordine Taleb. This is a bit of an interesting fight. I don't think it's going to be that competitive. Eric Silva looks like he's had some problems heading into fights. Looked out of shape for the Magny fight, and obviously, the UFC kind of has ruined his career, always pitting him against fighters that he wasn't really ready for, and he got knocked out a couple of times against Matt Brown, and then against Dong Hyun Kim as well. But this fight, I think Silva has a submission advantage, and we saw Nordine Taleb get caught in a guillotine in his last fight by Warley Alves. Silva seems to struggle if he can't get that early first round submission or TKO, which he usually gets against guys. Almost every time it's been against a really low level opponent that probably didn't belong in the UFC. Guys like Takanori Sato and Mike Rhodes. So I feel like Nordine Taleb, he might be able to push Silva a little bit. He's more of a process fighter, kind of the opposite of Silva. Not a great finisher. He's got a good jab, decent technical striking, a good kickboxer, and then hit a takedown on Warley Alves, which I thought was surprising because I thought Alves would have the far more, or he would be the far better athlete, but Taleb was able to take that into the second round, I believe. But I just don't think, he can win a decision against Silva. I think at some point Silva's going to be able to find a submission. And on the feet, he has a lot more power, and he's still a really great athlete, even though he's had some setbacks. I think Silva is just, he's the more dangerous fighter. He's more skilled, at least with his finishing ability, than Taleb. And I think it would have to take a really off night for Silva to just get out wrestled or out jabbed by Taleb for 3 rounds. So I'm going to take Eric Silva here by submission. All right, next up at welterweight, Brandon Thatch versus CR Bahadurzada. Another fight that should be a complete mismatch, at least on paper. I definitely have to go with Brandon Thatch, even though he's had setbacks to rear naked choke losses to Ben Henderson and Gunnar Nelson. He should still be the far better fighter than Bahadurzada, who is coming off of a long layoff. I have to check here when his last fight was. 2013. That's pretty ridiculous. So, 2.5 years ago, and it was a loss to John Howard where he got out grappled by John Howard, and before that lost to Dong Hyun Kim. This would be a disaster if Thatch was to lose this. And losing to Ben Henderson and Gunnar Nelson, those are really talented guys, obviously, in the division. And I thought he was competing really well against Henderson before he just got taken down. And he's obviously weak on the ground, but I can't see Bahadurzada out grappling him. I mean, he couldn't out grapple John Howard. Brandon Thatch, I want to see him get back to those performances that he had against Paulo Thiago and Justin Edwards. I think he can do that here. Yeah, Thatch by quick TKO. All right, on to the main card. Women's bantamweight, Amanda Nunes versus Valentina Shevchenko. Good matchup. Shevchenko had a really impressive win over Sarah Kaufman in her debut. In her last fight, was really dominant in the clinch. Beating her up from inside the clinch. Has had the better striking. But Amanda Nunes, I still feel like she's just a really dangerous fighter. Great blend of aggression and technique. It's not like she's just a reckless fighter. She's able to be aggressive and still remain composed with her striking. She's developing her leg kicks. You saw that against Shayna Baszler. Pretty much won the fight just on leg kicks, and dropping Sarah McMahon and submitting her. That was really impressive. I still have to go with Nunes. Those wins over that win over McMahon, and she almost finished Kat Zingano right out of the gate. I think that's still more impressive than Shevchenko's win over Kaufman. But if she can't get that quick finish, I definitely feel like Shevchenko could tire her out in the clinch, grind out a decision win. But I'm going to take Nunes. I really like her aggression. That's a lot to deal with and withstand. So I have to go with Amanda Nunes here. But Shevchenko is definitely a live bet, I think. All right, next up at light heavyweight, Corey Anderson versus Tom Lawlor. Definitely going with Anderson here, hands down. Lawlor, even though I picked him to win his last fight against John Villante, he was losing every second of that, getting outstruck, and looked like a lot of those punches were doing some damage. I also like the win he had against Michael Kuiper before he went on a long hiatus. But that fight too, almost got his legs broken from leg kicks. He was able to pull out the guillotine, but was losing. So he's a guy who can pull out a finish when it seems like he's on the brink of defeat, but is not a guy who's going to win rounds. He seems to get outstruck pretty easily. And Corey Anderson is maybe one of the only viable talents, young talents at light heavyweight. And he's become a really good bread and butter fighter, using his wrestling, grinding out, guys who are better on the feet than him, or at least, he doesn't try to take risks on the feet. Had no problem just taking down Jan Blachowicz and Fabio Maldonado and grinded them out in not very fun fights, but completely dominated them on the ground. And he's a good athlete. Persistent wrestler, and even his striking is pretty good. I thought he was outstriking Gian Villante, and he had a bunch of leg kicks and got knocked out late, but I thought that was a late knockout. I thought he was, if that fight had gone all 3 rounds, he was definitely going to win the decision. So Lawlor is not a good, doesn't fight well over the duration of rounds, really can only win by getting that crazy finish. So I'm going to take Anderson here. I think he out-wrestles him for a decision. All right, next up at light heavyweight, Gian Villante versus Ilir Latifi. Interesting matchup. Still don't feel like this is a pay-per-view worthy fight, but decent matchup. Ilir Latifi coming off of a nice knockout win over Sean O'Connell. Gian Villante, he's gotten a lot more patient with his game, a lot more composed with his striking, and but he still has a major liability on the feet. You can think back to the Cody Donovan fight where it looked like he was about to get knocked out before he landed the knockout punch, and the Corey Anderson fight that I was just talking about, he pulled out the knockout late, but was just getting battered for 3 rounds in that fight. I think Latifi is going to have a good chance early here because Villante has become really patient, and Latifi will be able to be more effective trading in the pocket. Villante, I think he's going to want to stretch the fight out. And, at that point, I think he could start to wear out Latifi, score points with the kickboxing and stay at distance. But Latifi is pretty good at rushing in, closing that distance early, and getting the knockout. Villante might try to out-wrestle him here also. We haven't really seen Latifi's ground game. Did get a submission over Cyril Diabate, but, Villante, we haven't seen him be put on his back, so I think Villante could go that route. But if you compare their fights against Sean O'Connell, Latifi had the far more dominant, quick win. I actually thought Villante lost that fight, and wasn't too long ago, just a couple fights ago for him. So Latifi, I think, is going to be able to close that distance early, get inside the pocket, and land some bombs. So I like Latifi for an early knockout here. But if it goes a couple rounds, I think Villante could start to pull away as the fight goes on. But I'm taking Latifi for an early knockout. All right, the co-main event, women's bantamweight title fight, Holly Holm versus Miesha Tate. Initially, after Holm beat Rousey, I thought Tate was going to win this fight, just based on her ability to, not just rush in like Rousey did. She has better fundamental striking. She has a better jab, and she's probably the better wrestler than Rousey. I mean, you think about her fights with Rousey, she was able to take her down a few times. When they got on the ground, there were some times when Tate was able to get on top, defend the armbar. So Tate, she's a strong wrestler. And no one has really tested Holm there, just with the wrestling. Obviously, Rousey tried to take her down. She did. But I think was already badly hurt before that point. I just felt like Tate could, she could not just run at her and wrestle, but, close the distance, get a hold of her, and then really force her to wrestle. And I don't know how good Holm's off her back, so that's why I thought initially Tate could win the fight. But, even though we've seen Tate do well grappling in our last couple of fights, the Jessica Eye fight, the Sarah McMahon fight, she has not been doing well on the feet. She did drop Jessica Eye, but she was getting hit early in that fight by Eye, and Sarah McMahon dropped her. Sarah McMahon, who's a wrestler with not very technical striking at all, just kind of throwing haymakers, and she was able to drop her early in that fight and even out grappled her. So, on the feet, I really struggle to see Tate having any success there. I don't think it's going to look anything like the Rousey fight, because Tate is just too smart. She's not going to rush in like that. But Holm's going to be patient. I think it's going to look like the Renault fight, more like that, or even the Pennington fight. She's going to stay at range, stay at distance, be very patient. I think Tate's going to have a hard time coming in, and I think Holm, she will have the chance to connect and hurt Tate. Again, Tate was dropped by McMahon. But if Tate's able to close that distance and wrestle, and she's able to keep that up for a few rounds, that could be interesting. I just don't really see that happening. I mean, if Rousey couldn't do it, I don't know if Tate can really do that. And it's not like when Tate goes to the ground, she submits people. I mean, even the Liz Carmouche fight, that was a horrible fight that some people thought she lost, and that was back and forth on the ground. So I don't think Tate is as dominant on the ground, at least in terms of getting the finish, as we might assume she is going into this fight, even though Holm's not the traditional grappler. But on the feet, I think Tate's just really going to struggle, and if Holm connects cleanly, I think she's going to drop her. So I have to go with Holm here, and I think she probably wins a decision. All right, the main event in welterweight: Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz. If it was at lightweight, I would say McGregor's going to completely run over Diaz. I don't know about finishing him, at least not early, like he's done to Aldo. Just because Diaz, is not a guy who's finished easily, and I think Josh Thompson maybe is the only guy who finished him ever in the UFC. I think that's right. But at welterweight, that adds a totally new dimension to this fight. McGregor at welterweight, I'm not sold that he's going to look the same as he did at featherweight. I mean, for a guy who relies so much on speed and movement, carrying all that extra weight 2 weight classes up, I could see that slowing him down a lot. And if that's the case, if he can't move, evade Nate Diaz, not be as elusive as he was at featherweight, I could see Diaz having a lot of success with his kind of flat-footed, high-volume boxing. And we saw against Michael Johnson, he tried to play the speed game, and it did work for him that first round, but eventually, as soon as Nate Diaz started connecting, he hurt Michael Johnson, drastically slowed him down, and then every time they got in range, Diaz would just light him up, and Johnson pretty much couldn't hit him for the rest of the fight. So, if McGregor is slower, he's not able to use that movement, and Diaz is able to, stand his ground, and force McGregor to fight in range, I could see Diaz having some success there. But it's just that Diaz is really shop worn at this point. He's taken a lot of beatings, even though that Johnson win was really credible, especially considering his layoff and considering that Johnson was a top lightweight, coming back and having a legit win over him. That was really impressive. But the Rafael dos Anjos fight, he just ate a ton of leg kicks, ate a ton of shots, took a bunch of ground and pound, and I still feel like the book's been written on Diaz. Josh Thompson was able to just totally overwhelm him. He had him figured out and knocked him out, and I just can't see a guy who struggled so much like that beat a guy like McGregor, who has really become the master of movement and technical strike, not just technical with his hands, but really technical with his movement. So I definitely am going with McGregor. I still think he's going to be too dynamic, and he's going to be able to hit Diaz, and especially considering how flat-footed Diaz is, I think McGregor's still going to be able to light him up and get out of range. I don't know if McGregor finishes him, just because Nate Diaz can take a huge beating. But yeah, so I'm definitely taking McGregor. I think he either gets a mid-fight finish, maybe 3rd, 4th round, or just wins a pretty dominant decision. But that speed, I think, is really something to watch out for. And his cardio, who knows how his cardio will be. Because Nate Diaz, he's usually pretty strong late in the fight, unless he's just taking a massive beating like he did against Dos Anjos or Ben Henderson. And another thing to consider is Nate Diaz's submission ability. Now, Nate Diaz is not a great wrestler. When's the last time he took someone down? I mean, let alone submitted them. His last submission win, I have to look. His last submission win was against, Takanori Gomi in 2011, so 5 years ago. It's not to say he's a bad submission fighter. Obviously he's not. He just hasn't done it in a while. But if they get into a scramble somehow, if he's able to get in the clinch, I could see him jumping on a guillotine. Just any situation where there's a scramble. I think Nate Diaz, if he locks something up, that could be, something very devastating for McGregor, who, hasn't, Nate Diaz, when he gets a submission, he finishes it. Think of the Jim Miller fight or Takanori Gomi, but he's got that high elbow guillotine, especially when he has guys hurt. But I think he might try to expose that against McGregor. Nate Diaz, his guillotine is definitely something that can end the fight against anybody, and especially McGregor, who, he struggled to defend the takedown against Mendez. Mendez went for that guillotine, passed to side control and tried to go for that guillotine. And frankly, I think that was a very lazy attempt from Mendez. And Nate Diaz, if he's able to lock on that guillotine, I think that's it. I really think he can submit McGregor if he's given that opportunity. So that's definitely something to watch out for. But it will have to come off of a scramble, or McGregor slipping. Maybe Diaz rocks him and hurts him. Maybe he gets him against the fence and pulls guard, jumps back for a guillotine. Because Nate Diaz, he's not a standard takedown guy who's going to take you down and take your back. He's really not a great wrestler. So that's something I would look out for. He definitely, I think, has a big advantage with his guillotine over McGregor, or even a triangle or an armbar if he's put on his back. But I still have to go with McGregor. Nate Diaz certainly hits hard, has power in his striking. Put out Gray Maynard, which probably doesn't mean much, but was definitely visibly hurting Michael Johnson. So I would really watch out for that speed, see how much the weight affects McGregor's movement, and if it happens that he can't be as elusive as he is, if he has to fight more in the pocket, I think Diaz, if he's able to turn it into a brawl, he has a chance of outstriking and hurting McGregor, but still definitely have to go with McGregor. I'm going to say he wins a decision. All right, guys. Well, those are my predictions for UFC 196, McGregor versus Diaz. Thank you for watching. Sorry, that was a long video, but it's such a special main event. I had to go on for a bit. My Twitter link will be in the description, so follow me on Twitter. And one of my viewers, he suggested that I list my most confident picks in the description, so I'll try to do that. I don't think I'm prepared to do that right now off the top of my head, but I'll think about that and evaluate, and I'll try to list those, my most confident picks. But guys, so the next event after this is Hunt versus Mir. Also have Magny versus Lombard. Those should be fun fights. So I'll have my predictions out as soon as I can for that event. So thank you guys. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.